Okay.
Come sit down, please.
You have a notebook?
Yes, I do. Wait, no.
Timer?
Some flour. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, just a minute. Just wait a couple minutes. Svi, don't jump in all the time. You know, I know you're going to be eager to ask all these questions. Just save them up. Okay, Facebook Live is beginning to accumulate some folks. And let's see. Oh, hey, Svi. How are you? Good to see you. The Facebook Live people can't see you. Only I can see you, actually, at the table. Good to see you. Okay. We are on the last of a series here. For those of you who have not tuned into the earlier parts, we've been doing a 4-part series on womanhood and femininity through the lens of Chassidus. And tonight we're going to focus on Rochel Imenu. It's funny, she's the one that we call our mother, Rochel Imenu. I mean, Mama Rochel. You know, I don't know of any others that don't say Mama Sarah, they don't say Mama Ruth, Mama Rochel. Mm-hmm. But to get up to Rochel, we'll just have we'll do a little review and a little broad overview of too much volume.
Yeah, just put on this side because the microphone's here. So.
I just want to make sure. Can the Zoom people still hear me? Tell me. Can you hear me?
They can hear you. I didn't lower you. I lowered their volume.
Okay. All right. So we started with, we didn't start. We'll start with male and female. Where does it come from? So God said in the Torah, in Bereshis, Nasa Odom B'Tzalmenu. Let's make a human being in our image. And the word Adam, there are many different explanations on the word Adam. But the one I picked as I was walking down the street that I think is appropriate. Guys, mute yourselves, please, so in the meantime we don't get feedback. Okay? Mute yourselves on your end. I'm just going to take a look here at the Zoom. Yeah, your iPhone is not muted down there in Florida. So please mute yourself. There you go. Great. And now I know you can hear me. So, Adam, how do we spell Adam? Aleph, Daled, Mem. Aleph stands for the word.
Isn't this last Mem?
Aleph stands for the word. We just had a masculine walk in. What's going on?
It's the volume or the video?
No, it's just static.
Hold on, guys. Hi. Little technical reparations.
Hi. Oh, nice to see you.
I cracked this open.
It's so sweet. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm going to get up in a second.
Good evening. You are, do I know you?
I'm Mo, how are
Feel
you?
free. What is it?
Can you tell me if it's working now?
Mo Galvin.
Mo.
Yeah.
Hi.
I'm a local Apicurus.
Okay. Some of us are non-local, of course. We have local and local ones as well. Mister, you ready or not? Should I continue or
You
not?
go ahead. You go ahead. I'm
Okay.
just going to start it.
Okay, for those who are in clear reception. So, Aleph Dam. Where does the human? The human is a combination of this word Adam, of a combination of two words. Aleph, Aluf, first letter of the alphabet. Why is it the first letter of the alphabet? Because it begins everything. And this, which begins everything, of course, is Hashem himself. He's the beginner of everything. And this beginner of everything invests itself in the domim, dam for domim, the inanimate. So what did he do? And that's the expression, really, what happened when he created Adam. He took his very essence, his alufe, shel olam, his being the beginning of everything, and he invested it injected it, infused it into the dirt. Remember the story. He drew a circle in the dirt and he blew a living soul into it. And that's Adam. Adam is God himself invested in a body. Now, at this stage, there's no differentiation. The Aleph is just singular, as an echad, one. But from this singularity, there emerges a duality. The first fundamental duality is the emergence of male and female. And it's an emergence, because you know the story, that the female emerged, was extracted from the all-inclusiveness which was Adam, and then became an entity on her own, which Adam called Isha. He took from the Ish and made Isha. We have a question at the table. You say it loud and I'll repeat it.
So, you know how women give birth? So in this scenario, it seems like the man is giving birth to woman.
Excellent. He said, you know how a woman gives birth? So it seems like in what I said, the man is giving birth to a woman. And I can understand why you thought that. But the point that I want to make, maybe I'll try to make it clearer, is that this first coming out was not from a man, as we say, a man versus a female. It was coming out from God. And God includes both male and female. So what he did was he separated out the female from the male. That's what he did. And from then on in, you're right, the children all come from the coming back together of the male and female. So that's point number one. Now, what was this woman? Who was this woman? Or this female entity that came out? So after Adam, was given the ability to name everything, and he called this woman Chava, from the language of chayos, life, vitality. She became the life of all nations, the life of of everything. And now, it's an interesting phenomenon that we have to understand how it is that this entity, which is the Chava, the life of all life, the life of all everything, was the one who tempted the man to take the fruit from which everything fell down from there. So on this, Chazal tell us, Bina Yesera Nitna La'isha. An extra measure of understanding was given to a woman. What did she understand? She understood that the way the creation had been first initiated, instantiated, was not what God had in mind ultimately. What he had in mind was a higher level of reality than the level that existed in Gan Eden. And to get to that higher level, there had to be what's called the breaking of the vessels. I won't go into it in detail, but the very, very high energies fell down into a broken state in the shards and the remnants of a world which preceded this world called the world of Tohu. And again, without going into much detail on it, the point is that God envisioned a world which would have an advantage over the initial world by being repaired, the advantage of light which comes from darkness. And Chava had this extra measure of understanding, to see that it was necessary to complete God's kavanah, that there should be a fall, there should be a break. And from the darkness that resulted in the break, there should emerge a higher light. And this is actually the way King Solomon explained it. Or min ha-choshech. There's an advantage, there's a yisron ha-or min ha-choshech. There's an advantage of light which comes from darkness. So that's the first instantiation of womanhood. Bina Yesera Nitna La'isha. An extra measure of understanding is given to a woman. From there, we moved on to Sarah. Now, Sarah is one key thing about Sarah. She had two names. The initial name was Sari, when she was Abraham's princess, belonged solely to him, so to speak, in the small world of the nuclear and extended family of Abram and Sarah. And then her name was changed to Sarah, to become a princess, to become a royalty over all of creation, all of humanity. And the principal event that brought that about was Avram and Sarah's descent into Egypt. From her descent into Egypt, she became, as many people, we all hopefully experience in our own lives, a certain strength that comes from dealing with the seemingly haphazard difficulties of life. The strength that comes from overcoming. The strength that comes from perceiving, for being thrown into darkness, which certainly Egypt was a dark place. It's called the Erebus Oilam, the most low place on the earth. It had extremely high developments of Avodah Zorah, idol worship, extremely high developments of technology, i.e. the pyramids, of which we were instrumental, we as a people, in building those pyramids. But it was dark from the perspective of godliness. It was the opposite of godliness. And confronting that, she acquired Malchus. She acquired the strength of royalty to be Sarah, to be that which has an expansive rulership over all of the lower worlds. She acquired Malchus. The next one we dealt with, and I'm being very brief here because we spent each week we spent on each one of these through a different mimer in Chassidus. The next one we spent was Rivka. After Sarah comes Rivka, right? Yitzhak marries Rivka, the son of Abraham. Abraham marries Sarah, the son of Abraham. Yitzhak marries Rivka. And the secret to Rivka is in her name. The Alter Rebbe points out in the Mimer that the word Rivka, vocalized a little differently, becomes Revaka. And what is Revaka? It's a team of animals. It's a team of animals harnessed together. You might have noticed, I'm noticing it as I'm talking here, there's a theme here. The theme here is the harnessing of the lower levels of reality, the darkness in Egypt, the fallenness from the state of the Garden of Eden. Harnessing that. And Rivka represents a peak moment, a peak experience, so to speak, a pivotal moment in the harnessing, Ravaka, harnessing the animal soul. And that's her name. And how is it embodied in the Chumash? From the fact that Rivka is the one who digs, who lowers her pitcher into the well. The pitcher is the numerical value of pitcher, Kof Daled Hey, that's the word Tadah. So the numerical value of the first two letters, Tadah, 24, 24, are the number of books in the Tanakh. So she represents what will happen much later in history, the emergence of the Torah from the well springs, because she dips her pitcher, her tad, into the well springs, into the deeper levels of reality, and from there brings up water. So again, digging down deeper is the quality of each of these women, from Chava, who has the Bina Yasera, the extra measure of understanding, to see that the world needs to come on to a higher state through healing the brokenness, to Sarah, who goes down to Egypt and acquires strength down there as a result of confronting the darkness to become Sarah, and Rivka, who puts her pitchers down into the well. And from there, last week we went on to Leia and Rochel, the sisters. And I'm going to go really not get into that because there may be one thing to say about that. The sisters. We're going to concentrate tonight soon on one of the sisters, which is Rochel. But the two sisters together, as you know, the two sisters were rivals. But at the same time, they both were sisterly to each other. And we see that right at the beginning, when Yaakov, who basically fell in love with Rochel and was promised Rochel as his bride, was deceived by Leia coming into the tent instead of Rochel. But Rochel was actually part of the success of that, though she was hurt. I mean, imagine the kind of hurt that she had. She knew that she was meant for him, and this was being disrupted by brother Lavan. But she, Rochel, knew that Lavan was a deceiver, and she gave Rochel a secret code so that they had made up that since Lavan is a deceiver, he might try to deceive you. We're going to have a secret code together so you'll know it's me, Rochel. And she gave that secret code to Leia. She totally put herself aside. And on the other hand, near the end of the story, Leia did the same thing. Leia had virtually all except 2 of the Shvatim, and she felt bad and had pity on her sister, and ultimately she gave her sister these herbs or roots, whatever they were called, mandrake is a translation, so that she could have 2 tribes, Yosef and Binyamin. So with that, we'll move on. Maybe I'm going to take a drink, so any question, any comments in between, let's get them on the floor now before we move into the minor. Okay, tonight is called Rochel, the Source of Compassion, which hopefully we'll see why. Another pasuk from Shir Hashirim. So we'll read the pasuk and translate. Imlei tedoila. If you do not know, Hayofa benashim, you who are the most beautiful of women, Tzeiloch be'ikvei hatzoim, take your flock and pasture it in the footprints, the ikve, the heels, the footprints of the sheep. V'royes gedidisov, and pasture your flocks, al mishkanes haroyim, on the dwelling places of the shepherds. So just we'll say it in English one more time. If you don't know, you who are the most beautiful of women, take your flocks in the footprints of the sheep and pasture your flocks over on the dwelling places of the shepherds. That's an allegorical statement, as virtually all of Shir, well, much of Shir Hashirim is. In fact, the Torah itself, as we've mentioned more than once, is called Mashal HaKadmoni, the primordial mashal, because everything in it, though it occurs in real life, is also archetypal for other dimensions. Okay.
Sounds very beautiful.
So Kesiv, it's written, Rochel hoyeso yafos ta'oyer v'yafos mara. When we're introduced to her in last week's parsha, she's introduced with these 2 kinds of beauty. Yafos ta'oyer, she was very well formed, which means on the physical, just physically, but we'll see it metaphorically as well. V'yafos mara, and she was beautiful of appearance. And we'll discuss the difference between those 2. So this first thing we know about Rochel. She's beautiful of form and beautiful of appearance. Pirish, so the Alter Rebbe jumps right in and tells us an explanation in Yafos Toyer. Yafos Toyer, we'll take it plainly, is B'tzire Vore, has to do with the form of her limbs, the shape of her physicalness. L'fitachnusam v'midosam, according to their structure and their proportion. She's well proportioned on the physical plane. That's Yafos Toyer. And of course we're going to get into how this is explained Chassidically in a few minutes. But first we'll just understand the plane. She's a physically beautiful proportion, everything just right. Yafos Mara, and now what it means, she's beautiful in appearance, something else. Beziv v'hoid cluster haponim. This refers to the ray, the radiation, the effusion, the aura, we might call it in English, that comes from her face. Cluster ponim. Cluster ponim, I'll give you an example of which for me made me understand the line fears what class the panim was. I had a Rebbe, Sholem Bereshevsky, Oliver Sholem, and he told us in class we were learning Gemara, but he has a way of talking, and he told us that he remembers when he was a small child in Europe before the Holocaust. He said the average Jew looked like the Rebbe. I said, what do you mean? He said they had a cluster upon. They had a shine in their face, and that's the idea of cluster upon. Something that reveals something shining in the face, as we'll say. Rochel hu Chassidus Yisroel. So the first thing we have to know, Rochel is the one. Why is she called Mama Rochel? Why is she called Mama? Because she is the embodiment of the entire Jewish people. Now, for this, I have to step back just a little bit and talk about the Spheros, the 10 Spheros. In the 10 Spheros, Leia is predominantly Bina. She comes from the Bina is the intellectual faculty, Chochmah, Bina, Das, 3 intellectual faculties. The one where inspiration gets articulated in a way that can be understood is called Bina. And that's occurring in the world of the head, in the world of thought. So Leia is associated with the world of thought. Now, thought is meant to give rise to feeling and ultimately feeling to action. Action, the action sphere, is the one at the bottom, which is the sphere of Malchus. Everything flows into Malchus, and Malchus becomes the womb which gestates everything from above and then generates the birth below. And Rochel is associated with that, with the world of speech and action. Leia is the world of thought, and Rochel is the world of speech and action. So therefore she's called Chassidus Yisroel. She's called the Jewish people, the source of the Jewish people, because the source of all souls, the proximate source of all souls, is in Malchus of Atzilus, Malchus of the highest world. So Rochel is Chassidus Yisroel, Klanicha b'Shem Rochel. And why is she called Rochel? We got a lot of points that we've made here so far, and they've been coming fast and furious, right? She's pure. She's a beauteous form. She's a beauty of interior. Her interior shines out through Klas Tequana, right? And at the same time, she is Malchus of Atzilus. She is the source of all Jewish souls, and she's called Rochel. Now, Rochel has a meaning, just like Rivka had a meaning, other than the name. Al Shem HaPasuk, this is according to the Pasuk that's in Yeshayahu, which actually is describing Mashiach, the redemption, the coming Geula. Yeshayahu is a book full of prophecies that have to do with the redemption. And it's describing the Mashiach as the Mashiach is in bandages and the Mashiach is in pain, because Mashiach is absorbing the pain of all our iniquities. And in that section of Isaiah, the prophets, so it likens the Mashiach, the Savior, the one who's bringing the Geula, Rochel lifnei gezuza nelama, like a sheep amongst, when she goes in front of the shearing, they have the shearing, the hairs shorn off of her, she's silent. Now the word for sheep is Rochel. There's many, many words for sheep. I thought, I'm not sure if it's true, but I think the reason there's so many, because it was so integral to daily life in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. It was integral to the offerings. Offerings were brought up, which you have a kevis as a sheep, you have a tzi as a sheep, and one of the words, the female sheep, which we spell in English E-W-E-U, is called a Rochel. And in fact, you'll find it in this week's parsha as well, when Yaakov sends a gift to Esau, sends a bunch of animals, and in the list are Rochelim, sheep. So this is going to be one of the pivotal points of our minor and our understanding of Rochel Imenu, Mama Rochel. Rochel lifnei gezuza neloma. Rochel, the sheep, when she comes to the shearing to have her hair shorn from her, is silent. So the Alter Rebbe now begins to explain the Inyan. What is this about? Silence coming at the time of the shearing of the sheep. The Inyan is this. It's written and we're going to back up a little for a while in the minor. Nasa Odom Etzomeinu. Levi, you want a copy? Yeah. Excuse us. Another guy here. For those of you who are following the minor inside or online, we're down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. The line begins with Hine. Since I've paused anyway, any questions so far? Any comments? All right, guys out there in Facebook Live, you're also welcome to, put up some comments. Okay, the Indian is this. Gehinna Kaziv is written, Nasa Odom Etzomeinu. That's the pasuk I began with when we were just talking about. God said, let us make the human in our image. But Pirish Tzalmeinu, what does it mean in our image, Tzalmeinu? It says like this, Al demus akise demus kamar odom. God extends himself outwardly, expresses himself from his essence, which contains everything in potential, and actualizes certain things, which ultimately are everything, but everything that's actualized in reality, in the world of multiplicity, coming from a source of absolute unity. So he says like this, Yechezkel had a vision. We spoke about a different aspect of that vision last week. It says, Al demusakis kamar odom. Yechezkel had a vision of a throne, a chariot, and on the chariot was a man, and the man was sitting on the throne. This is a vision, this is an allegory of God himself, sitting in his throne, taking on the role that God takes of kingship, essence far deeper than kingship just being something he does. So he saw an image of an Odom, a human, on that throne. V'hu b'chinas l'cha Hashem hagadul. And what was the image? The image is what became articulated in the language of Kabbalah as the 10 spheros. God has no language. God has no mouth, no talk. He says we speak, he speaks. These are metaphors. And so God comes out of his essence, and when he comes out of his essence and shows himself, quote, on the throne, he shows himself in 10 different aspects. L'cha Hashem hagadula, greatness is his kindness, the right sphere. The hagavura is on the left, and all the way down. V'kachu b'nefesh ha'odam. And similarly, it is in a human being, a physical human being. Zayin midos. We have 7 midos, chesed through malchus, and they start with ava v'yira. Ava is chesed, yira, fear or awe is gevura. Here, fear or awe is you shrinking back from either plain fear or from the awesomeness of the experience. And ava, you're giving yourself out, which is chesed. And all the others. But you can't compare, even though we have these, the 10 spheros, which are in the shape of the Adam, are the source of Adam down here below, but you can't compare the midos the way they are in the soul of a human being, shehi bailas gvul, which a human is a limited creature, the gabi midos of Yisborach in relation to God's midos, shehu ein sof, because God is infinite. The midos of ein sof, and his midos are also ein sof. In order to radiate, he takes just the light of Chesed, the light of love, from the infinite to the finite. There has to be a complete nullification of the person down here below in his existence to God. Shehu liyes bechinas offer v'doinim. Nullification, will come back and explain this, to become offer v'doinim, to become like dust and like stone. Doinim, it's interesting, the word doinim, which is inanimate, also means quiet, completely quiet. So this is our play on the word Rochel. When she goes to the slaughter, the shearing, she's quiet. So what does this mean? Rochel is the one, what we just said, for a human being to absorb the Ein Sof, which is a logical paradox, that something which is infinite, finite, should be able to absorb the finite. That happens through giving away, nullifying all the finite aspects of yourself and exposing the raw source of infinity, which is your nefesh elokis, your godly soul. And the way to do that is through being quiet. That's why in so many pathways to any kind of spiritual adhesion, taking quietude is usually where it starts. Quiet. Meditations of the breathing, quiet the noise in the head. Right? So if you quiet the noise in the head, which is all he's using here as a metaphor for calming and moving away from the limits of rationality, of rational brain, so you'll discover that there's an openness in yourself, which is the godliness which is infinite, and that godly soul which is infinite is the receiver of the infinite from above.
Is that the only correlation? Because
What do you mean?
quietness.
Is that what's your question?
Meaning, no, I'm saying there's other correlations in Torah, let's say in Pirkei Avos, even about what it is to be quiet. When you're quiet, there's a certain bittul, and when there's humility, like when you don't respond back, or when you. So are you
All of
talking
them.
just about the quiet in your head and in yourself, like a stillness,
Esther's raising a good point. I'm using that just as an example.
Oh,
The
okay.
quiet in your head, but the quiet in general. The quiet.
How do you square that with having to learn Torah out loud?
What's your
You're
question?
supposed to learn Torah out loud, right?
What's your question? I didn't hear it.
So I mean, how do you square it with having to learn Torah like,
Okay.
verbally?
He's asking, how do you square the bittul with having to learn Torah? You mean to master something?
I mean, they say you're supposed to like do it out loud, right?
You're supposed to say the Torah out
Yeah.
loud. What's the?
When you're
I don't-
learning.
I don't see how the two are
Because
related.
it's not quiet. It's anything but quiet. It's,
Oh, you mean it's in words?
yeah, yeah.
Words. But if you're going to say Torah in words, you have to have absorbed them in your thought, right? The words are just for communication. The thought is where you become. Oftentimes, I don't know if you've had this experience, but oftentimes you may come across an idea in Torah which totally contradicts the experience you had. We have an idea in Torah, I'll use them for example, that we know the scientists tell us that everything that's in the physical universe is like everything else in the physical universe in a state of a gradual decay, and stars are born and stars die. The Torah tells us that no, the heavenly bodies have an existence in each and one of them all eternally, as long as God wills it that way. So when I first heard this idea, I'm just using this example, it was what do you call it? There's a word for this. When you get cognitive dissonance.
Oh, yeah.
Cognitive dissonance. That's the expression. So in order to be able to give over the Torah, you have to first resolve the cognitive dissonance in your head. And the only way to do that is to listen. Drop your judgment about and the perspectives you have, and listen to what the Torah has to say. And then you're able to talk about it. So we're not really talking here about the difference. Speaking is part of bittul, in the fact that it stems from a quietude of brain that becomes, because of the bittul, broader and opener. So bittul is a synonym also for becoming open, becoming broad, quieting the impulse to say, that's not right. Or in a relationship. Let's do it in a relationship. To quiet the judgment when you see someone coming at you in a way that either contradicts your desires that you have for what should be happening, or in ways that you can't understand. Right? Pirkei Avos says, don't judge someone until you stand in their place, and you can never stand in anyone's place. Never. Even your own kids, especially.
Right.
You just can't. So what can you do? There's a beautiful book, which I haven't read, but why do I know it's beautiful? Because the title is beautiful. But the title is How to Speak So Children Will Listen.
How to talk so kids will
And this
listen.
is the
Listen
part
so
I
kids
want.
will talk.
And how to listen
Right.
so children will talk. So bittul is listening, opening yourself up.
I look at it just I would say on a personal level, like quieting the narratives and quieting the triggers.
Quieting the narrative and quieting the triggers. Quieting the triggers. Good.
I have a question. Can we go back to the shearing of a sheep?
The what?
Can we go
Oh,
back
the shearing of the
I'm
sheep.
disagreeing here in
The
person.
shearing
Sorry,
of
no,
the sheep.
doesn't.
Sure.
Okay. Is there any connection between Rochel then being compared to as a sheep that is shorn, and the fact that Yaakov's twin Esav is then Sayer, hair, and the hairy one?
I can't speak to that.
Interesting correlation.
I'm not aware of any correlation.
Okay. I'm just thinking hair.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go further. So now, why and we're focusing so much on bittul? Because the shir is called Rochel, the source of compassion, and really, bittul is the source of compassion.
Bittul is the source of compassion?
When a person puts himself or her state in the state of bittul, then you can listen, and then you can embrace ultimately or take in the perspective of others. And when you can take in the perspective of others, you don't get that trigger of dissonance that disagrees with me, etc., etc. You have an ability to
Well, it
be
says
compassionate.
bittul and compassion. It doesn't mean you have to agree with someone.
No, it doesn't. That on the contrary, you don't have to agree. That's the
Right.
beauty of it. You don't. You even back. Maybe you continue to disagree, but at the same time, you're suspending judgment. There's no din, right? Your din, or let's take what is the root of compassion is tiferes, where din and chesed are mixed. So that a gevura, yeah, you still have some, but your overriding midah of tiferes is the chesed. Your willingness to entertain and absorb and appreciate the other's perspective. So there's bittul. Now, she's remember, she's Mashiach. She's the Mashiach in Isaiah. We said this expression, like the sheep going to the shearing is quiet, is the expression of Mashiach in a state of exile. Because the sheep is not expressing herself. She's bittul, and that's in the beginning. We spoke about kingship. Melech HaMashiach, the true Jewish king. One of the hallmarks of the sphere of Malchus, of kingship, is, think about this. Malchus, which is kingship, or royalty, is the bottom of all it's the bottom of the whole funnel of so it's open. It receives everything. It's bittul. And its bittul is the source of its power to be king. Because the hallmark of the Jewish king is the Jewish king rulership is a rulership about what's good for the people, not what's good for the coffers, unless the coffers are good for the people, and not what's good for the king, unless the king has to have strength in order to be good for the people. It's all other directed. So the bittul, which is Malchus, is the source of the reimamus, the exaltedness. It's a very interesting paradox. Exaltedness comes from bittul, in the proper relationship. In what's called shriros, which is just dominance, rulership, dictatorship, it's the reimamus, it's the exaltedness which prevails. In true kingship, it's the fusion of the exaltedness and the bittul, which provides.
I just thought of something very interesting.
You
that
thought of
applies
something
to this.
interesting.
Yes.
Go ahead.
The curse of Chava was that one of the curses was that her husband would dominate her, right? And we also know that when Hashem created the world, we have the sun and the moon is compared to women, and the whole thing with the, when the moon complained and the sun ended up
Right.
being the source of light. Does that mean, when it says in Chassidus that the feminine aspect will be revealed, that when Mashiach comes, or when it's the time of redemption, that there will be a queen over the Jewish people?
You mean instead of King Mashiach?
Or
there'll be
maybe a queen and a
Mashiach?
king, but
I don't know.
wouldn't that make
Never
sense?
heard that. There's a certain logic to it. Well, but I've never heard it. Anyone have? Could chime in, but I've never heard it.
Why? I think that
What I have heard and what I have learned in Chassidus is that one of the hallmarks of the age toward which we are moving, which is the age of Mashiach, is that the feminine qualities will become much more predominant, not only in women, but in men as well. So there'll be the fusion.
What?
What? Okay,
Feminine
you asked what? An excellent
fundamentals
question.
of Chassidus.
The feminine qualities. What are the feminine qualities? Well, we've talked about them. We talked about Bina, instead of just the projective aspect, which is the male aspect, which is Chokmah, on the right, projecting its effusions outward. There's the receptive quality of taking it in and understanding it. Bina Yisera, understanding. There's also the faculty of, what's the one we have on the plate right now? Bittul. Instead of the macho male, males will become more receptive, more compassionate, more open. So we're clearly, and this is pure Chassidus, and something I can say without going out on a limb and saying I'm saying it on my own, which I don't like to do ever, so the kernel of what you're saying I can see very clearly. That the time as we're coming to Mashiach, the merger of masculine and feminine, meaning the power to project that is a masculine virtue, is coming into womanhood, and we see this clearly in the feminist movement from the 60s through today. Women emerging and wanting to emerge with full power and full stature in their capabilities. And what we are seeing somewhat, I'm not sure that it's the same, doesn't have necessarily a movement yet.
There is a movement.
There is a movement?
Against the censorship of women in the frum world. Yes, there is a movement.
No, I'm talking about the masculine becoming...
About the masculine?
The masculine becoming more feminized.
There's a perverted version of that.
There's a perverted version of that, exactly. But the actual version, developing more sensitivity, more compassion, more understanding, the ability for a man to sit back and absorb rather than fire out. That's the feminization of the masculine. And I think we're agreeing that in culture, to society today, we're seeing more of the masculinization of the feminine than we're seeing the feminization of the masculine. But anyway,
there are movements against men, toxic masculinity. There's websites. There's a whole movement. There's lots of.
Well, I have to say, this is an aside. Here's an aside that when in 1960, probably, I'll tell you, it was 1966, when the women's liberation movement really had just begun, and it was very strong on campuses. I think I told you this. I and another guy started a men's liberation group on the campus of the University of Massachusetts, but it never caught on.
What was the premise of it?
Exactly what we're talking about.
You were too early.
The macho man
But the time
cultivating
wasn't
some
ready.
other virtues. It didn't take off. It hasn't taken off.
Most practicing his silence and bittul by.
Okay, so let's move on.
That's part of it.
Unless there's anything else out there that needs to be said at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're talking about bittul, so Rochel, in her, I guess, nullifying, she had the opportunity to have the malchus. She had the opportunity to have the kahuna. And by her giving that to Leia, not even knowing whether she would get to marry Yaakov initially, that was bittul.
Absolutely. We spoke about, maybe you came on late, we spoke about that in last week's class, that the very beginning of last week's parsha, when she gives the secret codes to Leia, she mavatels, and she's exiled from her husband, right? And she manifests this tremendous compassion. But meanwhile, the sheep is being shorn. The sheep is Rochel is in exile. The notion of Rochel, who is the the notion of Rochel to embody and in a realized way that she is Knesset Yisroel. She's the source, which is Malchus, and that's the Mashiach is in exile, and that we went over quite a bit last week about the exile of Rochel from her husband, and the exile of Rochel from her as a result of her barrenness, which ultimately, and it should happen to anyone who needs this kind of a blessing, that the blessing of giving birth should come as it came to Rochel, ultimately through her bittul.
David came from Shevet Yehuda or Binyamin?
Pardon me?
David HaMelech.
David comes from Yehuda. David comes from Yehuda.
Interesting.
Saul is from Yemen.
Shaw was from right. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Right.
Ukamaimer, more on bittul. Ready?
Wouldn't that have made more sense? Sorry. that the kingship should have come from Binyamin, like it started off that way, but then it moved on to Yehuda.
I don't know. When you're asking me what's in God's mind,
Right.
I
Okay.
really don't know.
You're right.
Okay. What makes sense to us is not necessarily what the real sense is.
Yeah. Well,
Ukamaimer, like the expression goes,
mm-hmm.
we say it every day in davening, right at the end of Shemona Esrei. The nafshi ka'ofer l'kol tihiyah. My soul should be like dust to everybody. Just one little comment. This soul being like in bittul. Don't, maybe you won't make this mistake because we've talked a lot about it, but don't mistake bittul for I'll put it this way. Bittul does not negate self-esteem. Self-esteem is totally important. That's the reimanus, the exaltedness of the king, right? But bittul is the nullification of the ego, egolessness, but not feeling like you're, like this could imply, let my soul be like dust to everyone who tramples on me, to being a shlamazel. It doesn't mean being a shlamazel. Bittul, on the contrary, is the source of strength, of true exaltedness, not the source of being thinking
Right.
like you're a shlab.
Or letting go of boundaries.
Yeah. So when we say, let my soul be like dust to everyone who walks on it, this is like the dust which was in the dirt of the Mishkan. What was the Mishkan? The Mishkan was the first place that we had that had any lastingness, where the Or Ein Sof was present and active. And it was through the Mishkan, whose floor was dirt. So this was a place where the Or Ein Sof was revealed. Like the Mishkan, the Or Ein Sof Baruch Hu. So this is how we ask the question, how are we made in the image of God? The attributes of God are infinite and ours are finite. Through bittul, through rising above and putting aside the voice of the noise of rationality and coming into the depths of bittul, which is ultimately the depths of the heart, which are deeper than the mind, we become manifestations of the Tzelem Elokim, the Tzelem of God. B'tzir ha'evorim, and it becomes just like God comes out of his essence and manifests himself in 10 spheros, and then that's those 10 spheros. I'm sure you've seen the picture of the 10 spheros are in the body of a human, the right arm, the left arm, the heart, etc. So these are all of our limbs. Our limbs now become limbs for expressing godliness. Okay, Ava, year, love, and fear, and so from the seichel comes the midos, and the midos give rise to machshava, dibur, ma'aseh, thought, speech, and deed. V'zehu b'chinas yafis Torah, and with this we have explained what it means that Rochel was beautiful of form, her limbs, her constitution,
Right.
her physical body embodied the 10 spheros. She is aru ba kol hamidos. There was formed in her, Yafis Torah, formed in her, all the midos, b'shlemus, and all of her midos in a wholeness, a completion, each one just the way that God intended it to be expressed. I told you the short word from the Rabbi Rochel that it's told amongst Chassidim, that the Rabbi Rochel, that when he was 12 years old, he mastered that all of his limbs and organs should be in the service of God. So this is a tzaddik, and this is the tzaddik, in our case, Rochel. She becomes midos b'shlemus, complete midos, ubayofen, and with beauty. Yofi, by the way, beauty is always touched, and beauty is tiferes. And why is it tiferes? Because it's a blend. She's perfectly balanced. She's a human being in perfect harmony with herself and with everything. Perfect balance. That's yofi. We say in Hebrew, yofi, yeah? Well, that's what it means, according to the Chassidus.
Isn't the Yafis Torah the lady you capture on the battlefield?
That's the woman,
A beautiful woman that you
the
capture.
woman you capture on the battlefield.
So we're
Beautiful.
comparing.
When you capture a woman who's beautiful of form, but we won't use that muscle for this. But yes, why are you attracted to her? Because she's physically very beautiful. Yafis Torah. In fact, he'll mention this. So, but she is Yafis Torah not only in the flesh, but also Lamaila, the way things are. She reflects the Godly Midos in perfect harmony. Vazeho Rochel, and that's what it means. Rochel Hayaso Yafis Torah. She was beautiful of form. Shebechinis Yafis Torah, this form, beautiful of form, who al yedei bechinis Rochel, comes through the Rochel, who is Lifnei Mezuzah, comes through the Bittul. The perfect balance, the perfect integration comes from listening, being open, and absorbing. Absorbing what? Absorbing God's what? God's essence in our soul. Now all of this, now we'll go to your physical plane, we're talking about the body. But even though we're talking about the body on a grand archetypal plane, it's just the body. And we're going to contrast that now with the other expression, which is Yafis Mara, that she was beautiful of appearance, something shone out from her. Everything we said was on the external so far. Shehem Avavir, which is the midos, the seven midos, the right arm, left arm, etc., the form of the primordial body. And her thought, speech, and action. Aval bechinas penimius, the inner dimension of her, bechinas urausa doliba, is the will of the heart. Now this is remember, Yafis Mara was likened to cluster punim, the shine of the face, and we've said many times here that the word punim, which means face, is the word penimius. So just like when you look in a person's face, you can see what's going on inside, much more than looking at any other body part. So similarly, the shine on the face exhibits what's going on in the soul. You want mine? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're on the bottom of the page. Bechinas penimius, cluster punim, the shine of her face. What's her inner dimension? The inner dimension of a human is not in the mind, it's in the heart. And will take us back to Chava. The left side of the heart is she's the extra measure of understanding. And the Zohar says she's Bina. And the Zohar says that Bina Liba, Bina is the heart, Uboha Lev Medin, and the heart comes to understand. Now, in Western culture, we're used to thinking of the mind as and it is. I mean, we're not throwing that away. There is a certain level, an important level of understanding, analysis, construction, invention that comes from Bina. But ultimately, Bina is above all that. Bina reaches into Ra'usa Daliba, the depths of the heart. Shehu, turning my page, which is, excuse me, Bechinas Ha'ora Penimius, of the Or Ein Sof. It's a ray from the inner dimensions of the light of the Infinite One, about which the Zohar says, the Leis Machshavah Defisabe, no thought can grasp him. It's beyond understanding. And from this Orah, Masim L'Knesset Yisrael, that comes to the Jewish people, Nikra Yafes Mara. We become, to the extent that we absorb and relate to that level of relationship with Hashem, we become Maris Yafes Mara. You can tell by what's going on in the face, what's going on in Penimius. Shehu Ziv Cluster Punim, which is the ray that shines from the face. You're thinking. You want to say? No. Shalachei Nikra. This is the advantage of having a bunch of people at the table. You can actually read their faces. Right? And on Zoom,
Not mine.
class,
Got a mask.
well, I can read half of your face. The eyes are pretty telling as well. Right?
Or I'll fog my glasses up.
So a short living example of cluster punim. And you can see what's going on with a person by looking at their face. Shalochein, nikra b'shem punim. That's why it's called punim, face. Why? Punim from Lashon penimius. Penimius misgalaboy. because the inner part, the inner dimension of a person is revealed in his or her face. Kemet Sovai Panav is a line that says his face was radiant. V'hu inyan mashikosav Yor Hashem Panav Elecha, right, in Berchus Koyanim. Hashem should shine his face upon you. What's it mean, his face? He doesn't have a face, nor a mouth. He has a panemius, though. He has an inner dimension. The inner dimension of Hashem should shine upon you. In order for the Jewish people to receive this face, the panemius of Hashem, it's through the force, which we'll call Rochel. And Rochel is now associated. This idea of giving yourself totally over, like the sheep being shorn and being quiet, totally given over, is expressed in Krishna when we say, with all of your might. Through giving yourself totally over, totally above reason. And believe me, and I know everyone here at the table, away from the table, struggles with this. Much, as someone said in my class this morning, much easier said than done, Avi. Well, it's true. It is much easier said than done, as is the whole Jewish experience. I mean, think about it. What we've been through as a klal, and what we've been through as individuals, and what we continue to go through.
I like to look at it as one little battle at a time.
Good.
It's not like
One little battle.
you have to
Good.
all of a sudden just be
But
perfect.
that's overwhelming. But
Yeah.
sure. But the battles that we go through cause us to dig down deeper. They call Bechol Meodecha. Shal Yidei Zeth.
I'm going to use the word battle.
Well, Esther
Because
used the word. Did I use the word battle too? Okay.
No.
Doesn't the
Esther
Alter
was
Rebbe use the word battle in
No,
Tanya?
I mean, of course it's used in Tanya. Milchama. It's a milchama.
War.
It's a milchama b'hasitra achra. It's a war against the sitra achra. It's a war against Esau.
Okay, it's a war against Esav and the Sutra Acha, but on the other hand, if we know that a Kodesh Baruch Hu has the Yetzer Hara on his payroll, then we know it's a battle, but it's also it's really a test, you know. But we know that the Yetzer Hara is truly he's an employee of a Kodesh Baruch Hu.
All right. So what you're saying, it's also called a test, and it's soyan. But the advantage of knowing it's a test is that you wouldn't be given this test unless you could unless you could pass. So there's more optimism, perhaps, in calling it a test than a battle. But it's called both.
Okay. But I like the optimism.
Okay, fine.
I don't like test. I feel like that means like you're playing with someone when you're testing
All
someone.
right. You guys can discuss this offline between tests and battles. Okay. Right. But in any case, it's meant to bring out Bechol Yodecha, right? It's meant to bring out your deepest powers. And through this, what happens through the test, the battle, in bringing out, you're drawing down much greater energies from above. Mareish Kol Dargan, from the head or the beginning of all levels, Ad Seif Kol Dargan, to the end of all levels. Meshikosav, as is written in Devorim, Metachas Zoroyes Oilam. Underneath, below the world, are the mighty ones. Down here, is basically where the rubber meets the road, is where the strength is really needed. V'zehu hayofa b'nashim. And this is now, we've covered two sides, Yofas Toya and Yofas Mara. Should we recapitulate it, or everyone's got it?
Got it.
Levi doesn't have it. So Yofas Toya.
Inner beauty, outer beauty, inner beauty.
Yofas Torah, beauty of form, that all of our 10 powers, the 10 spheros, the limbs of the supernal human, are all aligned correctly, in beautiful proportion. Rochel.
That's the inner beauty.
That's the outer beauty.
Outer beauty.
Outer beauty.
That's the outer beauty, because that's the way we show our
Or there's
limbs.
the
It's
expressions.
the body that you see.
Mhm.
The inner dimension, what you don't see, has a window through which it can be seen, which is the face, the klastoponim. And klastoponim implies that there's a beauty, there's a yofa. Yofis Toya, Yofis Mara. There's a beauty that comes from way deep down, where you can't see, but you can have a window into it. So that's Rochel. Now we come to our pasuk. You who are the most beautiful of women, Yofis Toya, Yofis Mara, and you don't know where to go. So what did the pasuk say? The pasuk said, just as a reminder myself, the pasuk said in Shir Hashir, go to and follow the footsteps of the sheep, and pasture your flock in the over the dwelling places of the shepherds. That's our pasuk from Shir Hashir. Excuse me. Okay. Let me find my place. Okay. V'zehu yafis nashim. So we're talking now, Shlomo Melech, to the beautiful, most beautiful of women. Pirish. Who's the most beautiful of women? This is Rochel b'chinas yafis Torah b'yafis Mara, as we spoke about above, and just now. V'zeh shekosov im le toydilach. If it's not known to you, Pirish le nimshach b'chinas hayofa b'nashim, meaning you haven't got it. You haven't brought this das, remember, is the faculty of integration. Right, left, and middle. Middle kav is the integrator. And you're lacking the das. You're lacking the integration. He's now talking to us. The Rochel in exile. The Rochel that's not able to come to this balance yet. Though we are this way, we're meant to be this way, where our soul is like this. It's a chelak elakam imal. But shaloi nimshach b'chinas yofis nafshin. It hasn't been drawn down yet. B'chinas das shlema, that we become totally integrated with it. Okay, Mashikosav is written, Mashikosav yesh neshomas, there are neshomas, there are souls, this is written in other places, that are called zera adam, the seed of a human. Sheyesh behem b'chinas das. There are two kinds of souls. Souls that come from Atzilus, which are called zera adam. They're a seed of an adam, the human. Remember, the one who was an integration of masculine and feminine before they were separated out. A perfectly balanced person, maybe a tzaddik, is called zera adam. And then there's the bechina of zera behema, which is all the neshamas of the lower worlds, which have various degrees of imbalance. A lot of balance to very little balance, as you go down the totem pole, so to speak. Sheish ben bechinas das. The ones that they have das chazak, the ones that are called zera adam. The hein neshamas etzilus. So he said these are the souls of Etzilus. Look at neshamas Rashbi, like the soul of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and other tzaddikim.
The godly soul or the animal soul?
He's the God. He's the Adam soul. Zera Adam. V'yesh nik shenikar zera behema, and there are those who are called literally the seed of the animal. She'ein bo bechinas das, who don't have so much ability to make this integration and balance. Yofis toyer, the Yofis mara, and be perfectly balanced. Finally, come in the Shema Shalanu, and he gives us a little rap here, like our souls. And you know who he's talking to? He's talking to all of us. And he's talking to his congregation. He's the Alter Rebbe writing to the Chassidim of his time. So these are like our souls. These are the souls of Biyah, the lower worlds. It doesn't mean they don't understand. It doesn't mean we don't understand. We can learn a lot and understand a lot about all of this and what proper balance is, etc., etc. But it hasn't come down and touched us so that we're aroused and activated and operating this way. We're not being nourished from our meditation, from our contemplation. And that's the first sentence. If you don't know. If you don't know. You, everybody around this table, everybody out there, everybody on Zoom, you got to know that we are Yofis Torah, Yofis Mara, but in various states of realization or not realization.
Realization or actualization?
Actualization or not actualization. Yeah, I meant that. Pirush L'cha, and it says, now it says, Im like Taidak L'cha, it's not known to you. This is understood from because of a pasuk, Eine Kol, and I don't know the reference to that, truthfully. Agzoisa Eitzah, so now he's going to, what's the advice? He's going to give us advice. What's the advice? To get more Yafis Torah, Yafis Mara. More
Integrated.
Rochel. More Rochel. Soy lecha be'ikvei hatzon. So the pasuk says, go into the footsteps of the sheep. Soy miloshin se'i, which means sheep, and it also is a lashon like yetze, claiming davar hayetze, something go out, go out. The hainu bechinas hayetze milamayla miseder stalshlus. Go out from thinking and overthinking it.
Oh boy.
Boy.
Become an empty vessel, basically.
Go out from overthinking it. Go out, go higher than the Seder of Estalshus. V'chu v'chinas tzoyin Lavan. And this is the sheep of Lavan.
Oh wow.
Now here we go. We're not going to go into this at length.
So Rochel is really the sheep of Leia.
Before
No.
you learn
No,
how to
no,
not
no,
overthink,
no,
let's help
no,
you.
no,
Let's
no.
I'm
overthink
getting
this.
confused.
Rochel
sorry.
is not the sheep of Lavan.
Good.
The state of being, of realizing the Rochel within you, is to go out of yourself into a place above reason, something more close to your essence, which is symbolized by the heart, which is called whiteness, the place beyond differentiation. And what we're throwing in here now, for the first time, there's a whole mimer on this, which is not for tonight, about Lavan of Kedusha. Lavan is white, isn't he? That's the word for white.
But we're not talking about Lavan as in Lovin and Basul and are we?
We are.
Yes.
We are.
Yes, but as I said, that's a mimer for another time. I mean, I'll explain it as
Well, we discussed the
is
source of
we
Lavan
just-
last week, or
yeah.
the week before, or something.
in the place.
Because we went into that last
I'll
week,
just-
and that was fascinating. But now I'm like perplexed. Like, so Rachel's the sheep of Lavan, and
No.
so she's no. I'm missing something.
We're
Rachel
overthinking.
is not the sheep. We're overthinking, as they said. Right.
Okay.
She's not the sheep of Lavan. To get to the Rochel, the Yafis Toy, Yafis Moyer, to get to the integration, you have to reach a place deeper than the faculty of analytical faculty, which is the faculty of thinking, and get to the white space within you, the empty space, the source of everything within you. In God's essence, there is no color, red, orange, yellow, blue, green, right? It's like spinning a color wheel and turning it white. So that's Lavan. When we think of Lavan as a holy thing, which is a totally new idea, not on the table for tonight. The Lavan we know is the Lavan from the Le'umazeh, the Lavan from the other side. And the single, and I'll try to put this in one or two sentences, because in God's essence there's no differentiation between right, left, middle. There's no differentiation. It's before the differentiation of good and evil. So you might say, I told you, I think last week about the heresy.
Last week you were talking about the Levana Elyon.
Lavana Elyon, right.
Okay,
So in Lavana Elyon,
that's
there's
the
no
white that we're talking
right.
about.
So from there can come all kinds of stuff, because there's no differentiation, there's no distinction, there's no
It's
value.
before there's any permutation in wings or spots on sheep.
Excellent. We'll leave it at that.
What
Before
is this-
any permutation in in blotches or spots or rings on sheep. Back to the story of the sheep.
Is there any correlation
Right.
to Mara Levina?
I don't. I'm going to drop this, okay? Because it's
No.
it's a topic in itself. The moon.
No, Mara Levina. In
Mara,
Chassidus,
yes.
there's.
What?
So I'm saying, is there a
There's
correlation
one of
to
the
this?
spices is called levana in the spices that the ketores in the Beis Hamikdash is
Right,
levana,
right.
right? So we see levana can be used for holiness.
No, I was referring to Mara Levina and Mara Shcheira, which is referred
Oh,
to.
I thought you were talking about the mirror.
No, Mara Levina. Is there a correlation to Mara and Mara? No. Okay.
I don't know. There's a lot I don't know. But
That's
but
surprising.
everything that I don't know and you ask, or anyone else, should be put on the table for somebody who asked it to research. I'm just giving a
Okay.
pedagogical
Or if you just go to the IL again and
perspective
ask the
over
Rebbe.
here. A rabbinical pedagogical perspective. Okay. Okay. So, son Lavan, and we'll just take the word Lavan as white. We have to reach, I call it, the white space of ourselves, the deep space of ourselves, beyond any spots and speckles and any details, right? And which is called Leiven HaElyon, the supernal Leiven, the supernal white space. Like the whiteboard. There's a good example. You can put anything you want on the whiteboard, right? It's a place it's a spot from which differentiation can come, but before anything is differentiated. It's a whiteboard. So you have to get, the Eitzah is to come, let's see, get the sentence now. Get to a place in yourself which is higher than Seder Stalshalis, which is the Lavan, the white space. The Chol Aveda she'Avid Yaakov the Lavan. And think about this. All of the work that Yaakov did was for the Lavan. Now translate this into ourselves. All the avoida that we're supposed to do is to get to an experience of the white space, the space beyond reason, the space of essence from which everything comes. And he worked Sheish Shanim B'Sinach, for 6 years for the sheep. And this is an interesting punchline. There are a lot of sixes, but the sixes that he brings is Shita Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 orders of the Mishnah. In other words, learning the oral Torah, delving in. And we talked about this when we were talking about halachas in Tanya. And some of us were learning Tanya every day. There's a beautiful little midrashic expression at the end of davening. Before Aleinu, there's a kaddish, and right before Aleinu, it says a pasuk, Halichas oilam loy. The goings of the world belong to God, and the midrash says, Al tikra halichas, don't read goings, read halachas. Right? In the halachas, in the doing, as we say in English, the proof is in the pudding. In other words, where will you find God's essence? The learning is important, because the learning, particularly the learning of Chassidus, develops a feeling and an emotion and a power that is meant to be invested in our mitzvahs, but we come over and over again back to the bottom line is the bottom line. Where will you find God's essence? Anoichi, Ani, Nafshi, myself, in the halachas of the Torah. So this is the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Shehem Bechinas Tzoyin.
So the 7 years to the 6.
7 years for each woman and 6 for the sheep.
Oh, 6 to the
A
sheep.
total
Okay,
of 20 years. 6 for the sheep.
Okay.
The sheep. And the sheep, remember, sheep is tzon, which is Lashon tza'i, which means going out. Go out. You see, there's a whole complex of metaphor. Tzon, take sheep, 6 for the sheep. Go out from the 6 midos, go out from the world of rationality, the lower structure of man, and go out and remember that the 6 sheep also, that the 6 years correspond to the 6 Mishnah, 6 Sidrei Mishnah, orders of the Mishnah, which is the way of going out. Because, I mean, I don't know how much experience anyone has, but the more experience you have in learning the oral Torah, the more you see how full of contradiction. I mean, the whole Talmud Bavli is basically about putting 2 contradictions on the table and resolving them. And resolution of contradiction is a good metaphor for, you mentioned warfare. Warfare is when 2 people are on 2 opposite sides of the table and can't find any resolution. Resolution is the process of what we call birur hilchasa, the rectification of the halacha. When you rectify it, you turn it white. You bring it back together again to that place where it originated in, which was a source of unity. So, I mean, personally, I'll tell you, this is an interesting explanation. In practice, this is very, very hard to really see that it's through the learning and embodiment of halacha, which certainly creates an amount of bittul. One has to be fairly bittul to take on. I remember a guy said to me, good friend, I've learned a lot of Chassidus and a lot of nigla and a lot of halacha, and I believe it, but I just can't do it. It's just too much to do it, because it's a big avoida. It's a service, and this is the service. So the eitzah that he's given is to cling to and embody the limbs of Hashem, which are expressed in the halacha. Shehem b'chinas tzoyin. And you should know that the halacha, which is the will of God, what God wants, just like your will, what you want is rooted pretty deeply inside of you, the things you want. So God wants the halachas, and that's what gives him pleasure. All the halachas, all the mitzvahs are drawn from God's deepest level of pleasure. And one key word he leaves us with, Asher Kitshanu, which you make us happy through Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvoso, right? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech Asher Kitshanu. Asher is the word for happiness. I'm just putting it out there.
Mm-hmm.
True happiness comes from internalization of the mitzvah system. How much have we done with time?
So if we're depressed, that means we're not doing enough mitzvahs?
What?
So if we're depressed, that means we're not doing enough mitzvahs?
We're not doing them right. That's just,
okay.
We're not taking it right. We're not taking with Asher. You heard this?
It means we need to adjust our perspective of
Adjust.
how we're doing.
Yes, we need to continue to adjust our perspective on how we're doing the mitzvahs. And part of the, adjustment of the perspective is learning Chassidus about the mitzvahs. You know, the more we know in the level where we feel it, we have a feel for
But
what this thing
it's
is.
not just perspective. I mean, there are scientific studies and also in Hasidic texts that, you know, when you do something, it actually changes your perspective. It will...
Sure.
That's a beautiful, remember, there's a quote from some psychologist, I forget his name, and I use it a lot, so it should have come to me, that change creates insight more than insight creates change. Right? That's what
Exactly.
you're saying, and a few nods out there. Right.
That's
So, yeah.
Naasav and Ishma.
Naasav and Ishma.
Was that the
Absolutely.
Vorah?
That's the Vorah.
Ah.
Hi, Vorah.
Okay.
Naasav and Ishma. Do and you'll come to understand. And the flip is true also. You know, through more understanding, more warming to, and a deeper gefeel, a deeper feeling for what the mitzvah is, you bring that to the mitzvah as well. So it's a two-sided, but yeah, the importance of the mitzvah is this doing creates change in the inner dimension. Kamashikosev is written in another place. I'm skipping now down to a bracket. I have all for all of you who are looking inside.
Mm-hmm.
The line begins Vahoya Yochel. And through this, one is able, through this that we just said, to connect with the mitzvah system, Naasav and Nishma. Change gives insight more than insight gives change. Through this, one it draws down the Oren Sof Baruch Hu, the infinite blessed be He, b'maaseh shel atzma, in actual deed, onto oneself. Shiyu kol maasav mishkan u'machon l'hashros ein Sof Baruch Hu, that all of your deeds should be a dwelling place, a residence for the dwelling of the Oren Sof. Aval onu, but aval onu ein lanu koyach zeh, but we don't necessarily have this power, ela b'ma shemuchon kavar, except through what has already been prepared for us. This goes, if you don't get it, if you're having trouble with internalization, im le'toida lach, right? Go follow, step into the ikvesh tone, the footsteps of the ones who preceded you. So we have an inheritance. We have a path for that which is kavar liyashon. There already has been drawn down through our predecessors this or Ein Sof, the Hainu B'chinas Torah mitzvahs, which are the Torah mitzvahs that were given to us, v'nikre ikve hatzoin, and that's called the footsteps of the sheep. B'chinas agvayim, and it's called footsteps, which is the ekev, which is the heel, which is the soif dargan, the lowest of levels, right? And we had that expression before, that from the highest levels, he injects himself specifically into the lower levels. It's expressed in an expression we use a lot from Sefer Yetzirah. The end is wedged in the beginning. The end is, and vice versa. The beginning is wedged in the end. His kavanah in the beginning was for the end, and in the end, Ma'aseh Mitzvahs is where it's at. The Hainu Torah mitzvahs, Hamalaboshim Binyanim Gashmiu, which are enclosed in physical things. Shal Yodam, and in that, through that, we can pasture our flocks, which are called the mazolos, which is also, I'm not going into this. When we do things down here below, pray, do mitzvahs. Let's take the mitzvah of the korban, because the korban on this is a good example for this. You take a physical object, whether it be an animal or grain, and you bring the grain to the altar, the animal to the altar, and there's a smoke. The smoke that goes right, and the Mishnah tells us that the smoke rose on the migrados of how strong the winds were. The smoke went up straight, a pillar of smoke, and it goes up and up. And in the first Beis Hamikdash, there was a shape of a lion that came down from above and sucked it up into the spiritual realms. This shape of a lion and other spiritual shapes that are above that are called the mazolas. They're the spiritual entities, energies behind the physical planets, the physical constellation. Sometimes the physical constellations are called a mazel. But if we say a person has a mazel to get rich, he has a mazel that he's been so strong and healthy. What a mazel, he's 120 years old, and he's just like a youth. We use the word mazel. And we use it lightly. So mazel has a real meaning. Mazel is something that spiritual, a sort of convection of spiritual energy that just takes things up higher and higher. So what's happening here is our avoided down here below, since the essence of God is in it, in order to reach essence, it goes back up through the channels that it descended from until it reaches essence. Well, B'kol Zeh Yuvan, top of the page, we just have a little more to go. Back at the top of the page, left column. Well, B'kol Zeh, with all this Yuvan HaPasuk, Avadasecha Arba Eser Shana, that his work was for 14 years, B'shtei B'nasayach, for the two daughters, B'sheish Shanam B'tzanecha, and 6 years for the sheep. Kinikasiv U'lalavan Shtei Banos. It's written, Lavan had 2 daughters. That was our parsha last week. Shem Hashem, so 2 Banos. Shem He Gedoyla. These 2 daughters correspond to the 2 He's in the Yud Kei Vav Kei. The big one, the top one, the first one is Leia. Sheshor Shoy, her root is from the Bechina, the level of the top He, of the Shem Havaya. That's why I said Leia is connected with thought. I didn't say it, the Alter Rebbe said it. And thought, or understanding, is the first He, which is Bina. The Shem, and the second He, that is Shem HaKatana, which was the smaller, remember, the younger was Rochel. Shem HaGadoyla, this is the pasuk. The Shem of the name of the bigger one, the older one, was Leia. The Shem HaKatana, the name of the smaller one, was Rochel. This refers to the He, the big He, and the small He, the latter He, which is Rochel. And Rochel is called Shechinta and the 2 He's are called Shechinat Elah and Shechinat Atah. The Shekhinah up above and the Shekhinah down below. So we come back to the 2 sisters. Very different, but in the same way, they embody the same essence, but on different levels. One is the Shekhinah, the divine presence, as it is on high, and Rachel is the one who brings it down low and brings it into the world. The Hey Mechinas Mokan Neshamas Tetzilus. And these 2, Hey Tato, and Hey is Bina, and the Hey lower one is Malchus. These are the configuration of souls of Atzilus in the higher worlds. Because souls of Atzilus also have these 2 levels. The higher, the first is called brothers, when we're called, in a sense, brotherhood or sisterhood, that kind of close relationship to God. And then we're called also children. Children go off on their own, right? By Rachel it's written that Rochel ba'im hatzoin asher la'aviyah. She came to the sheep which belonged to her father. Shehem neshamas biyah, which are the lower souls. Shenikra zera bahema, these are animals. She came onto them. So she, as we said earlier, integrates the lower worlds inside of her and creates a balance of higher worlds and lower worlds. And this is what we meant when we said, if you don't know, you who are the most beautiful of women, which refers on the neshamas of Biyah, the souls of the lower worlds, which are called Zera Behema. But Soin Shilayochel Lahamshi, we're called souls who are not able, we're not gifted with the gift of total integration and total ability to live with godliness every second. So, but we are given the ability to draw this down and become Yafa, to become Yafa Sheben Nashim, the most beautiful one of the women. See, the beauty here, let's talk about beauty. We've already talked about it, as internalization, as integration. Integration comes from having many different kinds of experiences and understanding if they all come from Hashem, what's the commonality? What's the common thread? Seeing the common thread in what's going on in one's life. Not easy to do. Seeing the hand of providence in everything that's an expression of beauty. Sense expression of integration. Lies yofis Torah v'yofis mara. And that is something that can be done through the proper attitude and approach to what's going on down here below. And the reason it's not that we're not born with it is because of the Pesichus Nishmosim, the lower levels that we're Neshomas that come from lower levels. The Hester Aguf, and also because of the concealment of the body and the Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul. As written in another place, this is your Yofis Torah. When you go out to battle and you find a woman that looks attractive to you, and you bring her in as a captive, there are certain things you have to do to demonstrate whether this is really a love or whether it's just an attraction based on a physical attraction. So you have to go through a process to bring out the real beauty and not be deceived by just the physical beauty. So similarly, you have to go through a process of not being deceived by the world as it presents itself and digging deeper to come to an experience of what's the real reality underneath it. This is the category that is the position of being uninternalized, unintegrated, is called galus, and that's the state of captivity of the nefesh Bahamis, when we are captive by our animal soul. And so then the advice is, again, sheish shanim, 6 years, you have to work. Again, this is 6 orders of the Mishnah, and it ends with that this adhesion to Maisa Hu Ha'ikr, to doing the deed, has the result of gradually weakening the Nefesh Bahamis, so that his strength is actually harnessed to serve Hashem as well as the godly soul. And that's Rochel.
Thank you.
Rochel.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. I have a question going back to the two hays, with one hay being Leia and one hay being Rochel. So what about the Yud and the Vav? Are the Yud and the Vav Yaakov and Esau?
No.
No. Okay, so
Who are they personified? Well, let's see. Yud is Chochmah, right?
Right.
Moshe is a personification. Chochmas Moshe. He's the Chochem. That I do know. So that answer your Yud. And the Vav I do is Yosef. Yosef is the midah of Yesod. And Yesod is if you can think about this, you have right, left, and middle. Chochmah being a das in the head, and then you have Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, and the one who channels all of that is Yesod, and that's Yosef. So Yosef is Yesod, is the Vav, and Moshe is the head. There may be others, but these are the ones that come to mind that I can say are pretty solidly based,
That makes more sense. Thank you.
Okay. All right, guys, till we meet again. Next week, God willing, Chanukah.
Next week is Hanukkah?
Next week is our class will be Hanukkah
For Hanukkah.
as elucidated, that's the language it means, lit up,
We've learned a lot of very good words from Chassidus.
Illuminated.
elucidated, explained by Chassidus. What's the inner meaning of Hanukkah?
Beautiful.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you think it might be
Thank you.
beneficial also to go
Thank you.
into, let's say after Hanukkah, to learn like